What's up, fish tank people? FishTankTV.com. Dustin's Fish Tanks bringing it to you on a Sunday, baby. How's everybody doing? I hope you're doing well. Your boy D learned a couple things when he was chilling on vacation. Thing one, take more vacation. Thing two, ask your subscribers what you want me to do videos about. Drop me a comment, tell me what you want me to do more videos about, and listen to them. This video is for you all. We're talking about the aerial advantage today. That's right, folks. We're talking about how plants grow above the waterline and the benefits and the downsides of that. But it's Sunday. It's Species Sunday. I'm going to bring it to you all with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 species of plants and how they grow above the waterline and how you can benefit with them. But first, I got to take a step back. Your boy Dio has a lot of knowledge from the aerial advantage to our girl Diana Wallstead. There is no way in hell she is watching this YouTube video, but if you do, Diana, you made a hell of a book. You all should go pick this book up. She talks about it in great detail, along with how to dirt a tank and a whole bunch of great biology in here. Wouldn't recommend it for anyone like under 15. I picked it up when I was a kid and immediately put it down. There's not a lot of pictures, but there's a hell of a lot of good info, so definitely check this book out. Diana Wallstead's Ecology of the Plant Aquarium, bomb-ass book. So, here's the Dustin version of it. Okay, so plants grow above the waterline in nature. When they grow above the waterline, they grow dramatically different. To give you an example of this, Hygrophila polysperma grows 4 times faster when it is allowed to grow above the surface of the water, emerging from the water, emergent, submerged under the water, okay? So I want to talk about that today with your aquarium. When plants grow above the waterline, they are able to more easily absorb CO2 from the CO2-rich atmosphere than they are underwater. Even if CO2 concentration levels are high in your actual water, it's still easier for them to absorb CO2 above the waterline in the air than it is in water. It's just a fact, even when you're dosing CO2, okay? The other thing, and I can't wait to make a video about lighting, is that they have way more light available to them because it's above the waterline, something called the Inverse A Blob, which we'll get into in a whole other video about lighting later on. Can't wait for that video. But when plants grow above the waterline, they can work harder, they can grow faster, okay? They can absorb nitrates way quicker from your aquarium and ultimately make your aquarium healthier by growing exponentially faster when they're above the waterline, okay? So you got to keep this in mind. Behind me here, I have 1, 2, 3 plants that are hitting the surface, and I want to talk about these 3 species as well as one species that I love to hate, another species that all of y'all hate. So we'll talk about the Krenim first. This Krenim natans behind me is using the aerial advantage growing above the waterline. Just because these tiny little tips are able to hit the surface, I can tell you for a fact this sucker is growing way faster, growing with its leaves, able to hit the surface because it can breathe all the CO2 from my skank basement down here. Same thing can be said with this little red Tiger Lotus behind me right here. You'll notice I got like 3 of them hitting the surface there. Red Tiger Lotus, Lotus in general, love when they hit the surface. And they're like, oh man, check out all the CO2, woo, it's the bomb. The problem is, if you let these plants, particularly Red Tiger Lotus and some others, keep growing to the surface, they're going to say, life's easier up here. I got more CO2. I got more light. I'm ready to roll. And they won't produce as good of a mass down here. So I'm actually going to trim those down. But if you want rapid plant growth, let them grow above the surface. The last plant I want to talk to you about with these 3 in my 220 is the Crypt By the way, Crypts, just for the Crypt nerds out there, are only able to be officially identified when their spathe, the little reproductive spathe, comes up, not the leaves of the Crypt. So this Crypt right here is a Crypt. It hits the surface of the water, and once it hit the surface, and I learned this from my girl Sally, she's got a beautiful tank with Crypt growing like crazy, which I could never get to grow until this happened. When this hits the surface right here, breathing heavy, loving it. The plant grows like crazy. It's putting off new growth. It's not an easy plant to get. It doesn't tissue culture well. It's hard to find, so this is one of my babies right here. And it's growing exponentially better because it's directly underneath the light, and it's able to get all the CO2 at once from above the surface line. But I got 2 plants that I also want to talk about today because it's Sunday and it's Species Sunday. The first one I'm going to go on a little rant about. Dwarf hair grass. Everybody wants dwarf hair grass when they get in the hobby. Like, oh man, I want grass, I want a carpet. Okay, dwarf hair grass, guess what? Dwarf hair grass in nature grows in about this much water. Let's go back to the aerial advantage. What's the aerial advantage? Sometimes it goes above the water line where it can readily absorb all that CO2 and readily absorb all that light because it's got, it's growing in like 2 or 3 inches of water, okay? Which is why a lot of people recommend it. I've never actually done it personally, but the DSM or dry start method where you run it with a dry start so it can more readily absorb all that CO2. That's why you have these tanks that are sealed up, they keep them barely wet, and there's all kinds of readily available CO2. The downside with that is when you get these plants in and they're grown above water, a lot of plants, they have to adjust to that. So they got life is easy, we're growing above the water line, we got full sun, we're cool. Oh, you're gonna put me all the way underwater? It's a heck of a lot harder for plants to make that transition. You see that with Amazon swords, you see it with Crypts, you see it with the dwarf hairgrass, dwarf baby tears all day long, baby tears, whatever. So you have to understand that sometimes this aerial advantage, these plants are using the aerial advantage, then you're putting them underwater. Sometimes people ask me, like, what can I do to get a carpet faster or whatever? If they've got no fish in the tank, I recommend drop the water level down to just barely covering the plants or whatever so they can get, like, all kinds of light and CO2 available from there and then fill it back up once you want to add fish. So I got one last plant that I want to talk about with the aerial advantage. It's the herpes of aquarium plants. Diana Wallstead talks about it. She doesn't call it the herpes of aquarium plants, but I want to talk about duckweed, okay? Duckweed, you grow it on the surface of your aquarium. What happens? It grows like crazy. It gets in your filters. It's all over the place. However, it works like mad, reproduces like mad, grows like mad, shades out the rest of your aquarium a little bit. You can always reduce the duckweed. Better than remove duckweed than remove algae off your stuff. And it grows exponentially faster because it's right at the surface of the water, full sun, full light, whatever you want, and all the CO2 it can handle, and it absorbs all those extra nitrates in your aquarium. Is that enough from the aerial advantage for you? Drop me a comment on what you want to know about the aerial advantage. Drop me a comment on what you want me to do videos about. If you like what I'm doing, subscribe. Make it a fabulous